Gavin Sherry got his start in technology when he pulled a computer out of a dumpster and taught himself how to code. Now he is the CEO of Autonomic, which was acquired by Ford and is helping to connect the transportation industry to the digital world. On this episode of IT Visionaries, Gavin talks about the future of transportation and how his team is building ways for mobility and applications to become a larger part of the transportation industry. This podcast is sponsored by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce. Salesforce just introduced the Lightning Platform Mobile, the low-code mobile app development platform that empowers anyone to easily build, publish, and manage AI-powered mobile apps for employees and for customers. Find out more at salesforce.com/buildmobileapps.
Welcome to another episode of IT Visionaries. I'm Ian Faison, Chief Content Officer here at Mission.org. And on the other line, Gavin, what's going on?
Lots going on. What's going on in the transportation industry? Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on the show. We've talked a little bit in the past, just a little bit, about transportation and some of the massive impacts that this is going to have over the next few years and that it's already having. And you've been at the cutting edge of this for a long time. Can you share kind of what you're working on right now?
Right now, we are building and operating a cloud platform called the Transportation Mobility Cloud. That's an API platform and application programming interface platform that simplifies common problems within the transportation industry for the world's automakers and large transportation operators.
And you didn't kind of always start in transportation. Can you share a little bit about how you got into technology?
Yeah, I got interested and excited by technology at a fairly young age, at least fairly young, considering I was a child of the 80s. And actually hold a computer out of a dumpster one summer. And it had a programming manual with it. I thought that that's how you use computers, you program them. And I sort of taught myself to code over a summer in a very primitive way. It attracted me because I could construct things in a logical and abstract sense. I was always big into kind of building and stuff like that when I was a kid. And finally, I could kind of let my imagination run free. And I sort of learned more and more programming languages, became a software engineer even before I left high school, and was doing like odd job kind of programming exercises at the early stages of the internet, at least rise of the internet. Went to college.
Wait, hold on. Wait, odd job? Like what odd job programming? Like the guy down the street's like, hey, I need you to build this program.
I mean, like 94, 95, the internet was kind of the Wild West. The internet service provider I used posted an ad saying that they wanted someone to build some security software for authentication management. So I said yes. Probably shouldn't admit it, but they asked for a kind of tax ID, like a company ID. This was in Australia. I'm Australian. And I put in a random number.
Yeah.
Anyway, about 6 months later, the Australian equivalent of the IRS sort of wanted to know why I put in an invalid number. And the answer was because I was 14.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was doing little things like that. And it wasn't for money. It was for the love of writing code. And that's more or less that story.
That's funny. That reminds me of Daniel Ek's story from Spotify where he was teaching his friends to code, like same sort of thing. He was like 14 or 15. And it's like essentially was running like a child labor ring without realizing it, right? Where he's like, doing all that stuff. That's fun. I mean, my summer job was a lifeguard, so that beats what I had. That's for sure.
Yeah, I surfed a lot as well, being Australian, but decided to kind of focus my attention around writing code. And thankfully, the person I was writing the code for, who got in a little bit of trouble for child labor laws and so on, kind of redirected my attention to open source software. So I got kind of interested in Linux and started kind of tinkering around with that, and then poured my energy into database software like Postgres and so it was a pretty popular database system. And then just started working on it. Ran a little consulting company. Did a terrible job at it because I was 20 and didn't understand like principles of cash flow. Then worked at just a series of big and small tech companies over the last nearly 2 decades, which is what brings me to my current position as CEO of Autonomic.
Yeah, and your most recent stint before Autonomic, you're VP of Engineering and Data. Was it and Data or just VP of Engineering Data at Pivotal, working on some big projects?
Yep.
What kind of? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, that the company ran probably about 4 different database products in addition to some other things like a cloud automation framework. And I've really been attracted to data my entire life. I had a paper run where I went and bought a copy of Microsoft Access with my hard-earned money. I don't know why data fascinates me so much. It's, I don't know, there's something deep and intrinsic there. But, just love databases and how they work. Love the processing of data. Is endlessly fascinating to me. So part of what we're working on here really is large-scale processing of data in ways that make it really easy for people to consume. So I guess that's the common thread in my career.
And then did you kind of just get bit by the entrepreneurial bug there? Was it a problem that you saw that was so massive that kind of nobody was solving? What was the impetus to found Autonomic?
I've always found a lot of enjoyment in small companies because something of a generalist in my personality. I like working on a lot of different things. I guess I get bored easily. Just like developing skills in new areas. You're able to do that in a small company. So I've worked at a host of startups over the last 2 decades. Always thinking about new startup ideas and like a bit of an investor and so on in startups. But we started Autonomic because, first of all, Pivotal was in pretty good shape. I held like a senior executive role there. Certainly had the startup bug, and was really attracted to the industry for the following reasons. First of all, I sold my car and was like between cars basically, and found that I kept on delaying the point of buying a new car because I was using Uber so much. This is maybe 5 years ago, and was sort of using Uber like 2 to 4 times a day. Found it as convenient or more convenient than owning a car. I didn't have a child at the time, so having a child does mean that you need a car. But nevertheless, without a child, found Uber much more compelling than personal ownership of a vehicle. Secondly, when I was looking at buying a new car, found that I really didn't care about what I call the traditional automotive aspects of it. I was more interested in the in-cabin technology and so on. Had attended a whole host of meetups and talks in the Bay Area about autonomous vehicle technology. Having processed a lot of data, I've been overexposed, I would say, to machine learning technology. I've built machine learning technology and AI technology in my career, and was confounded by how challenging a problem autonomy is. It can verge on the building of the general AI, which has been intractable thus far in human history. So, understood that this was like something very, very big, would, because of the nature of transportation, affect every person in the world because we all consume technology, and was finally a thing that wasn't just infrastructure, like a problem space that wasn't infrastructure related. Throughout my career, I've, as I mentioned, been building databases and whatnot. And databases tend to be part of a tool chain for another business to probably sell things to a third business that eventually impacts an end consumer. And, having gotten into the midpoint of my career, really felt a desire to, do something different, interact directly with customers, build technology that, my friends or family could, kind of directly consume. And that attracted us to the transportation industry. And so we decided to form Autonomic. We had been exposed to automakers at Pivotal, a real host of automakers and their problems. We noted that they had to solve a very challenging problem that was adjacent to their current strengths. Obviously, automakers are amongst the world's largest manufacturers. They're incredibly good at manufacturing. They are less good at building software or AI systems. And so we wanted to help them. That's a key aspect of building a successful company, wanting to help, working with people who want that help, and learning something yourself. So we launched Autonomic nearly 3 years ago. The rest, as they say, is history.
And so who were you selling to initially? Who were your initial buyers?
The world's automakers. So we had approached a few of them. We found the best connection, I'd say, with Ford Motor Company. We'd approached the automakers to just see if the idea was a good one. Would you use it? Would you consume it? Would you recommend others to use it? Do we look like the right people? This is quite a normal approach for startups within the enterprise space to get just some feeling that you're on the right path. Ford got most excited about the vision. It fit well into their needs, and they decided to invest in the company along with being a customer. And they joined the board. And about 16 or 17 months ago, they came by to acquire the company. And we joined the family of companies within the Ford ecosystem.
Yeah. So what is it like running a startup within, such a big company and such a company that obviously is, one of the original innovators in technology and driving technology to begin with?
One of the real points of attraction for Ford as an acquirer was how well they understood where they were, where they wanted to be, and what it would take to get there. That we intentionally structured the acquisition in such a way that the company remained independent. It kept identity, it kept its culture. I'm not a Ford employee, for example. I'm managed or governed by a board of directors. So it's very much like a startup still.
Oh, really? Wow. That's crazy.
Yep, we have our own offices and our own ways of working, our own equipment, which is of a different standard than Ford, because we're trying to attract a different kind of person, someone who's in Silicon Valley, really interested in solving some of the most challenging and innovative problems within technology. And so that small company feel is really important to people who look for that in life. So we've been able to keep that, which is great.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that the type of people that are going to follow the type of problem that you're working on, having, obviously we're here in the Bay Area as well, and we have listeners, in over 130 countries. And I think that, it's important to recognize that when you are working on a startup within a broader ecosystem, people go to startups for different reasons, for different types of problems, for different company size and all of that. And if you want to maintain that same connective tissue, then you have to have that sort of thing. And just kind of, plopping yourself under the big umbrella isn't always necessarily the best way to retain talent.
It's a really interesting time because on the one hand, a lot of the people want that startup experience, the high growth, the so-called rocket ship, and so on. On the other hand, to have the right to work on this class of problem, you have to be, if you look at the industry, generally associated with a very large company. And so the people at the forefront, for example, of autonomous vehicle technology are really, at least in North America, Waymo, GM Cruise, and Ford through Argo, which is itself a startup company that Ford helped incubate. So I think Ford has taken good lessons from companies like Cisco and Apple and IAC, who owns like Match Group, like Tinder and so on, about how to bring in innovation through these kind of startup channels. It's a really strong belief of mine that most innovation takes place in a startup environment, which is more constrained, more focused. And big companies are very good at operationalizing things at a really incredible scale, like worldwide and so on. And so bringing those two things together is a really interesting problem for today's large and small companies.
Yeah, one of the reasons we're excited to have you on the show, it's just the breadth of problems and challenges that autonomous driving creates. Like, it truly is something that I think, we will look back on 20 years from now and be blown away at how things, used to be done, as it should be, as we're creating technology.
I think it might be the hardest technology problem we've tried to solve today as humans.
Yeah, we interviewed a bunch of folks for our Future Cities podcast, from Lyft, from Lime, City of Detroit, City of Oakland, folks like that, and just talking about this idea and a bunch of other folks like WeWork and all that stuff, but about this idea of like autonomous truly will shape cities. Like how, imagine every single city street doesn't have parked cars on it, for example. Like all of the parking infrastructure, all of the, real estate fundamentally changes. How people move, fundamentally changes, which, creates lots of opportunities for more parks and more, public spaces and things like that. When you're in the weeds creating the technology, does it ever kind of feel like you're in on something where you're like, wow, we know we're building towards this crazy future, but you kind of have to keep that focus day to day because in the interim, it's just really hard to keep your head down and drive.
Totally. That's all of delivery is what I would say. That's what software delivery always looks like. I used to work for a gentleman by the name of Paul Moritz. He was the CEO of VMware and built a lot of Microsoft back in the day. And we were trying to solve some hard problems together. And his advice to me was the most important thing is to put one foot in front of the other and ensure that you're heading in the right direction. And when you're building things, it's always like that. It's hard to judge the progress on a daily basis. But the important thing is like momentum, like continuing to move, continuing to build, ensuring that you're going in the right direction. But not every day do you have the breakthrough.
I want to get into the transportation mobility cloud, what it does and all of that. But really quick question before that. Your logo it's an AU with a box around it for Autonomic, but it also suspiciously looks like Australia. Is that on purpose?
No, it's not.
Is it really not?
I'll tell you the whole story. So look, I love startups, and I was in Mexico, believe it or not, cave diving, and my co-founders had obtained a meeting, like pretty senior meeting at Ford, and had messaged me saying, hey, like we've got to build the pitch deck. And this is about 3 years ago now. And actually Ford probably doesn't know this either. But so we're all like jamming on the pitch deck. I was remote. I was like literally sitting in a jungle, like, with like 100% humidity, 100 degrees. I'm not like a very visual person, but it's like all hands on deck to do these kind of things in very, very early stage companies. So I was like scouring the internet for an appropriate logo that I could drop in without like any kind of copyright issue. And I found a copy of the periodic table. It was public domain. So I just chopped out the AU for gold section and just stuck it on the deck. And, at a later point, we hired like an actual creative firm and so on, and they adapted it to the logo that you see today. But the original one was literally just lifted from a Creative Commons copy of the periodic table.
I love that. That's so great. We look at it about that. So as a media company, we think about that stuff all the time because you can use like Library of Congress images for the same sort of stuff. So you can, there's a license for all that free stuff. I love it. It's probably how Breaking Bad got their logo too. It's probably the same sort of thing where they're like, hey, we can do this for free. Okay, let's get into your core product, Transportation Mobility Cloud. Can you share like what this does, who the types of folk that you're working with, and why is this so important?
What we saw in the lead up to the creation of the company is we were all using transportation and getting frustrated with it was there wasn't a good connection between the physical world of mobility and the digital lives that we all lead. Why doesn't everything just work like Uber? Was essentially what we're asking ourselves with respect to mobility. And our belief was that there was a missing piece of infrastructure to be built for the mobility industry. That would be a software platform, since it was about integrating into the digital world. It would probably be operated by the company that built it, because that's a hallmark of great modern, particularly enterprise-oriented software. It would be API-based, because that's another great example of a good business model, a way that helps people be successful with your technology. It's easy to consume. The world's developers are kind of calibrated for this, given that they're used to building against APIs from Facebook, from Google, from GitHub, and so on. And so we settled on these founding principles. While autonomous vehicle technology, electric vehicle technology present an infinite number of possible futures, we tried to hone in on what things would remain the same in the industry. What will we need in today's world? What will we need in a world where electric vehicles are pervasive? What will we need in a world where autonomous vehicles are pervasive? And we decided to start building that kind of technology. So at its heart, we believe that connectivity between the vehicle and the cloud is of paramount importance. How could you possibly build a car that drives itself if it can't even talk to the outside world?
Yep.
Is a simple way of putting that. And so we have connectivity services that we think represent the most forward-looking ways of understanding the problem, rather than the more traditional technologies that have been repurposed from other industries, such as IoT style plays. We very fundamentally believe that if you are going to make cars drive themselves or improve after the point of sale, that you would need to be able to land new software reliably on cars. And so we built an over-the-air update system. There's plenty of over-the-air update technology within the industry, but we built it with a new paradigm, which was, imagine we were operating large-scale data centers with kind of flaky servers that were semi-connected. How would we build this technology? The reason we modeled it in that way is that more and more compute is going to have to be put into cars. They're going to look like small data centers so that they can run the kind of AI workloads that we all anticipate that they'll need. And electric vehicles are kind of a computer with wheels. They're as close as we've seen to a computer with wheels in a production sense. And so it made sense for us to model it in that way. So with those two principles of connectivity and updatability, we really focused in on our strategy around the transportation mobility cloud. Since then, we've exposed APIs that allow people to rapidly do a bunch of common tasks, remotely interact and actuate things within vehicles, open the doors, honk the horn, pop the trunk, and so on. These are like basic, like crawling style solutions in the crawl, walk, run style metaphor. We've done more advanced things, which is we've built like an Uber in a box style technology. Our belief is that there'll be really compelling subsegments of ride hailing that different companies will want to focus on. It might be delivery of supplies within a particular industry. It might be addressing particular demographics of people, maybe taking children to school, maybe taking white collar workers to the office, maybe taking folks to manufacturing jobs and so on. And each of them will require a different style of technology, but they can be built atop a single platform. And so we decided to model that within the TMC and obviously launch it and so on.
I think it's so fascinating that with autonomous, that we kind of treat how we rode in cars to like how autonomous will be. And I love the way that you're thinking about it, about utilities, right? Which is like, there's a reason why we put everybody, all kids into a school bus, for example, was so that, we could drop, everybody off. But it's because of safety. It's because you have an adult that's driving, a bunch of children around, and you can't have something that's not monitored and safe. And I think that there's so many different applications like that for autonomous, where it's by utility of the person in the vehicle. And like you said, I think the way that people can build on top of the platform is so valuable, because we don't know what other utilities people are working on until it happens. So the flexibility to be able to build off of that is critical.
You're right. You've touched upon a point that's important to us and how we think about the world, which is really sitting down and understanding what is normal today, such as in the school bus example. Why does that work? What is insufficient in it? What are we putting up with because there is not a better technological answer? For example, in the school bus scenario, it would be more powerful still if we could formally verify the following: that the driver or supervisor on the bus has been background checked and is authorized to be with children, that the person on the receiving end at the school or at some other activity is the right person to open the door and escort the children off the bus or transportation. I think that there are many things that are right and have been iterated upon over time around the concentration, the number of people that need to be on the bus, and so on, the fact that there needs to be supervision. There are things that we can automate and improve with technology as we begin to explore AV by adding in new kinds of technology, new kinds of authentication from other parts of the technology industry.
Yeah, and I think back to the utility piece that, I think the way that things were done back in the day with the school bus example is like you're taking kids from all over a geographical area to one school or whatever it is, because that's kind of the way it was supposed to be. But especially in metropolitan areas where it would make more sense to group kids from where they physically live geographically to whichever schools are in proximity. And if you don't have like accurate mapping information or GPS information to feed into that, then it's just kind of like people, driving around in cars on a route. But now you can map all of those things. And then when someone, is sick or isn't going to go to school on a certain day, you're not driving and waiting outside of their house. It can automatically update the route and do all the things that we're used to seeing from, Uber-like services or Lyft or whatever it is.
An important aspect of this is to take a building block or modular approach.
Yep.
And we've been lucky that the company is relatively young. We've benefited from, understanding the most current patterns that have been successful at companies like Facebook and Netflix and Uber and so on, and applied them to what is a pretty, technologically challenged industry, right? At least digital technology in this example. We've really allowed people to build creatively in the way that addresses their problems. And so it's interesting when you speak about utility, a related concept in utility is like a tool chain, the ability to harness different parts of a platform in new creative ways. And so we've tried to build quite low-level self-contained services that can be integrated together by developers to solve these very complex problems around ride hailing or around auditing of where, say, a child has been, and ensure that they were picked up on time, dropped off on time, that there was custodianship of the person or the good at any one particular time. It's very normal for us to think about that when we're building infrastructure in more forward-looking companies where the whole company is digital in nature. It's been really exciting to expose this to an industry that is very mature, is heavily regulated, and is not populated exclusively with software engineers, as we associate in Silicon Valley.
Do you ever think that the way, the infrastructure and the governance of this type of platform is one of the most kind of critical things that people could get wrong? Because it seems like, obviously with the security challenges and things like that, but just the way that these things are governed from an infrastructure standpoint, it just seems like there's a massive opportunity, for outside threats or different things to come in that's like catastrophic.
We have thought about that. I certainly spent a lot of time thinking about it. We have sort of more security and compliance folks as a ratio to engineers than at any company I've worked with. And yeah. I've worked in scenarios where we've sold to like defense and in the intelligence community. And the reason is that, first of all, and rightfully so, people are very sensitive to how information about their location could be used. And that's rightfully so. And I think we will see much more focus on this in the media, in society, in politics, and so on. And the reason I believe that is we look at the level of concern and focus around data within Facebook. I think that information about, like, say, where anyone was at 2:30 on Thursday afternoon is more sensitive still. People would understandably not want, surveillance of their movement in that way. So we take people's rights and their ability to consent or revoke access to that information very seriously. Additionally, given that our technology can be used to actuate things in the physical world, we need to protect and limit that access to those who are authorized to do so. And so we try and adopt the most advanced software and hardware techniques to ensure that bad actors, state actors, and so on are not able to use our technology for nefarious means.
Anything before that you want to bring up before? I mean, I'll just kind of keep rolling. It sounds awesome so far.
What I'll touch upon is one of the key aspects of TMC. We've been really frustrated by the fact that there aren't really like killer car applications. Like if you look at on your phone, how many of the applications have anything to do with mobility? There's obviously an Uber app or a Lyft app. There's maybe like a Lime, Bird, Spin app, but nothing compared to your other sort of entertainment options like Instagram and all the various applications of that sort, games and whatnot. And we want to know why not. And one belief we have is that it's so hard to build applications for the transportation industry that there's something missing, and we're trying to fill that gap. We're trying to make it really simple for mobile developers, modern developers to build new creative things for car owners, for mobility users. But we're really at the very beginning of that change. The applications we see for mobility use cases remind us of the kind of early applications we saw for the iPhone or for Android. The question in my mind is, what will be the Instagram for the transportation industry, the thing that everyone needs to install and use all the time? It can't just be Waze, right? It has to be something more compelling beyond that, because Waze is essentially about the old way of using transportation. You're in your car, you're trying to get there as quickly as possible. So that all starts with like a simple, open interface that anyone can use. And that's what we're trying to build.
Well, you know what's interesting about that? So I talked to Diane Eisner, who was, I believe, the employee like 6 at Waze. She's just an awesome person. We were talking about how Waze started from essentially just like a blank map, and then their users filled out the entire map, right? So like it was like a, like a painting, blank canvas, right? But what I think that's really interesting, and which is, super fascinating because of all the different like user generated stuff that came up. But what I think that, you really miss from that type of application is the layering on of, disparate services that are happening all around you, of different ways that you could get to somewhere faster. And I think that that's kind of what you're talking about, is this idea that like, you start to see it a little bit with like, Apple Maps or things like that, where it says, you could do walking, or you could do transit, or you could do car, or, I don't know if there's like a fourth one, I think, but that's 4 options, and it's not very robust, right? Like to your point, if there was something that you could just click into the app and it's going to give you potentially thousands of options in one place, but it was, extremely easy to select the place, the way that you wanted to go. It was going to feed you the fastest routes to get there. Every single person would use that. We all want to get where we're going faster, but we don't know the options that are available.
Routing is very hard because of the sheer degree of optionality. You just can't, the human mind can't process the number of routes between, 2 different places that aren't, immediately conjoined. And so a lot of routing technology is about actually limiting the number of options to something that a human can understand, like no more than 3. I'm sure, all of your listeners can sympathize with that. I think the opportunities within routing are when you move into like private space or one-time spaces. For example, routing for events. When you're now on private roads, you're attending a concert. Like, think about the confusion you had when you arrive at an event and you're trying to work out where to park, what's the best place for me. I plan on leaving at this one particular time. I have children, I don't have children. I have, maybe someone with a disability. That is a segment that we all experience, which is actually not really well catered for. And so I think the general problem of like getting from home to work has been somewhat addressed by Google Maps, Apple Maps, other mapping options. But these things that actually cause us most inconvenience now are not well understood or addressed, and they're transient in nature, which makes them particularly challenging.
And I think the level of complexity, as you mentioned, when you have a family, when you have 3 kids versus 4, when you need to drop off a bunch of stuff at the location and then go look for parking or whatever it is, those things are added in complexity when you have a crying toddler or,
Trust me, I understand that one.
Yeah. Or when grandpa is like, I'm not walking more than 10 feet because he's, had a long day. So, I think that the levels of complexity, and there's nothing that's like at all empathetic to the commuter or to the person getting around, right? It's just like, hey, this is more or less the best way to go. And here there might.
It's interesting that you say empathetic. I felt the same way. We talked about cities earlier, and the funny thing about cities is that modern American cities are designed for drivers. We call ourselves a car culture, but we're actually a driver culture, a single driver culture, one person in the car.
Yeah.
And cities are often, not always, but often organized with that driver in mind. I think that what we'll see over the next 2 to 3 decades is a change in city layout to be more oriented to commuters, people trying to get between different places, different options in terms of their modality of transportation, and hopefully big transportation systems like cars and so on that dramatically alter the layout of cities can be somewhat like dismissed, like just pushed out of the city when they're not required. That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the idea of like you said with events, now drop-off areas are massively important, right? So you need to redesign the entire event space because now you need 50,000 people to be dropped off at one point in time rather than 50,000 cars to be parked there. We talked to, I think it was the head of policy at Lyft. It's like 67% of cars that are on the road are single driver. And they've done a bunch of studies, and basically like sitting by yourself in a car for more than an hour a day is like directly linked to like depression and all sorts of stuff. Like it's intuitive. It's like sitting by yourself in a car for hours every day. Of course, it's going to make you lonelier and make you feel worse, and it's not great on your body, and you're not moving around and doing all these sort of things. But at the same time, like you said, if the entire culture is kind of built on, I need to get this car that is mine to the other place where it is. I mean, when you drive to San Francisco and you have a car, you're like, I got to put this somewhere because I need to go. Like, I live in Oakland. I go to San Francisco. All the listeners who are not from here are like, what are you talking about? But it's a really important, larger theme that it's like if you're going from Oakland to San Francisco and then up to Palo Alto and then over to San Jose and then back to Oakland.
That sounds like the worst day ever.
Yeah, right. But I've had those days many, many times over the past few years. That
for your listeners, that probably takes about 4 hours, irrespective of what mode of transportation you might take.
Yeah, despite the entire thing being under 100 miles, probably.
Yeah, well and truly under 100 miles. Yeah.
Yeah. So those type of things, like there's no mobility solution for that exact drive. And we live in the technological, capital of the world.
And look how hugely limiting it is on our culture, right? I mean, I don't, spend too much time on, say, weekends and so on outside of this part of the Bay Area around Palo Alto and so on. I live here. But that means like I don't really get access to a big modern city like San Francisco. I have friends in Oakland and Berkeley, which is where your studio is, where you live, I think you said. And that's hugely limiting as well, right? Like, Berkeley and Oakland have more culture. San Francisco has more of a big city kind of feel. It's hugely limiting in our lifestyle to not be able to access those places easily. And I can see them right from where I live. So
yeah.
It's very, very frustrating and sort of hard to justify.
Yeah, it becomes something that I think is extremely hard to justify when you look out and you say traffic is going to continually get worse forever unless we do something about it. And I talk to people all the time. They're like, oh, yeah, I don't cross any bridges anymore. Like, what? That's not a healthy way of looking at life, especially at like exploring the areas around you. We need to do things that get people out of their house and exploring, not to be shut in. So on that note, I want to get into some lightning round questions, fast and easy questions. Anything else we missed before we get into lightning round?
Let's get into the lightning round.
Let's do it. Fast and easy questions, just like the fast and easy lightning platform from Salesforce. You can go to salesforce.com/build mobile apps to learn how to build apps fast and easy on the lightning platform. Fast and easy questions. Are you ready, Gavin?
Yep.
All right. Number one, what app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
Probably Instagram.
Favorite vacation spot?
Probably Mexico City.
Favorite book or podcast you've read or listened to recently?
Principles by Ray Dalio.
Favorite thing to cook or eat?
Had a nice steak last night.
Do you have a favorite use of AI or chatbots that you've seen recently?
My whole house is covered in different personal assistants. I have a young child and I use it for everything because I no longer have as many arms as I used to have.
I love that. There's more questions than ever before, but less answers. What are you most excited about for Autonomous?
I mean, the big idea, which is that we'll be liberated from the tyranny of having to drive ourselves everywhere all the time. It's just like more time, more convenience.
What is your best advice for a first-time CEO?
Find people you respect who you can talk to about how hard the job is.
That's a good one. What question did I not ask you today that you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
I wish I was asked more often. I guess I'd say, why is this important?
Why is this important?
Because we have to actually rebuild a lot of transportation. The most convenient way of building some key aspects of it is in software. It is a mammoth effort because every person in the world interacts with transportation in some way or other. It's one of the most confronting technological changes I've seen. And we're at the very, very beginning of it.
Final question here. I guess this isn't really lightning-y, so this is a non-lightning question. But last thing. Any thoughts on 5G and how how 5G capabilities will affect Autonomous?
I think it's hugely enabling for Autonomous. A lot of the prior generation work on Autonomous was about had to do with the lack of large scale bandwidth between the car and the outside world. And that should be eclipsed over the next decade with 5G. That being said, it's something of an enabling technology that will lift all boats in the same way that broadband lifted all boats for internet companies and internet users over traditional modems over kind of copper lines. So it'll be a great technological driver for the industry, but I'm not sure if there's any one kind of killer use case of it for it with respect to Autonomous.
Awesome. Anything we missed? Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
Definitely talk about our two recent partnership announcements. In pursuit of everything that we've been doing, we've announced a partnership with Fujitsu in Asia, obviously a powerhouse with respect to Japanese companies, and Japan is really at the forefront of mobility in some parts of the world, and also with Amazon Web Services. All of your listeners would be very familiar, I would have thought, with Amazon Web Services. We're really trying to build a platform like Amazon Web Services for the transportation industry. And so it made total sense to join forces in that regard and equip developers in the way that I've been touching upon in this interview.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Any killer apps that have been made so far?
Not yet. In all honesty, I'd say that the killer apps will combine the kind of convenience that we associate with systems like Alexa with newer technology around electric and AV. I think killer apps, the term is overused. I think that the true test of a killer app is one where you realize your parents are using it and you didn't have to tell them about it.
So true. Couldn't agree more. Gavin, thanks so much for hanging out today. Really appreciate you coming on the show. And yeah, next time in Palo Alto, we're right down the street. So
speaking again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you again to our friends at Salesforce. IT Visionaries is brought to you by the Lightning Platform by Salesforce. Salesforce just introduced the Lightning Platform Mobile, the low-code mobile app development platform that empowers anyone to easily build, publish, and manage AI-powered mobile apps for employees and for customers. Find out more at salesforce.com/buildmobileapps.